I think that this new generative AI stuff is completely groundbreaking / earth-shattering. We all have played with ChatGPT. We read about this stuff everywhere. We know about robots or self-driving Teslas. What that really shows is that this technology is ready for prime time, and it's doing things with data based on these incredibly high computationally trained models called large language models, of course. And they're capable of doing things that literally were previously just completely impossible.
What if the act of starting over wasn't a risk, but a skill? Simon Arkell's journey from Australian, Olympian, vaulting over 18-foot barriers to a serial entrepreneur clearing the equally daunting heights of biotech and AI is a masterclass in resilience and reinvention. In this conversation, you'll hear how door-to-door sales forged a founder who now tackles the sprawling complexity of clinical trials with generative AI. Simon doesn't just talk about innovation, he embodies the grind, the failures, and the vision required to reshape how life-saving drugs reach patients faster. Join us to explore what it takes to transform grit into possibility and to see business not as a game of smooth talk, but as an art of enrolling others in hope, and to discover how the same persistence that shatters sporting records can break open bottlenecks in global healthcare.
All right. Simon Arkell, a two-time Olympian turned serial entrepreneur and investor whose career exemplifies the intersection of excellence, resilience, and innovation. After shattering records as an Australian pole vaulter, not just a pole vaulter, I believe a left-handed pole vaulter, becoming a 5-time NCAA All-American and 9-time Australian record holder. Simon transitioned into the tech world, founding a number of groundbreaking ventures that have collectively raised over $100 million in funding. And his vision behind these companies like Prediction Software, Deep Lens, and now Ryght AI. So Simon has leveraged these technologies in clinical trials, cancer care, and biopharma innovation. And his work continues to redefine healthcare by bridging the gap between cutting-edge technology and patient outcomes. Simon Arkell, welcome to the DNA of Things.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's good to be with you.
To be reconnected. You know, we were talking at the top of this conversation, and actually probably over the course of our relationship, it was spanning nearly 10 years, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Been a while. And, I read that introduction, and, as much as AI helps me build all these introductions, what it really allows me to do is like shape it. Like it really shaped words, like, you're making sculptures, and it really gave me pause to contemplate, truly over, this idea of the competitive nature of business. Maybe competitive isn't quite the right word, but essentially, if I compare business to, say, sport or even extreme sport, it to me seems as though it's the most, extreme challenge on the psyche of an entrepreneur. And so I'm really excited to understand how, you see business with the athletic background, and, if any of the things that you've learned or had to overcome as an athlete, literally taking yourself to heights unseen before, if those things helped. But we'll get to those things, I'm sure. But I think maybe a place to start would be on how did you make that leap to entrepreneurship? Tell me a little bit about Australia. Tell me a bit about being a pole vaulter, and what was the thing that like hooked you into the entrepreneurial scene?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. So I'm Australian. I've lived in the US since the late 80s. I came to the US on an athletic scholarship, and all I ever wanted to do from the age of 11 was be an Olympian. The standard wasn't too high back then in Australia, and the only way I figured that I could do it is if I came to the NCAA, because I'd been on a junior trip with the Australian junior team and realized that this was the place you could get these athletic scholarships, you could compete against great athletes. And that's what I did. So I wrote to a bunch of universities, ended up at the University of New Mexico. I improved from 5 meters 10, which is 16.9, to 18.5 or 5.61 in those 4 or 5 years. And it was what I needed in order to qualify for the Olympics. So I went to a couple of Olympic games. and broke some records, which were pretty old records at the time, because the standard back in Australia then has at the time had I think slowly regressed. Now it's back up there. We've had great Olympic champions like Steve Hooker and world champions, and Australia now has the current female Olympic gold medalist from Paris. So great coaching as well. It's been great to see, but really kind of breaking that ground and coming over here and doing the uncomfortable things gave me a sense of comfort in that the path less traveled is something that provides a huge opportunity, as difficult as it may be. In parallel, I used to kind of inhale business magazines and Business Week specifically, and I just fell in love with the tech section of Business Week magazine and read that every opportunity I had, and just realized that after my athletic career, I wanted to be in tech. I just loved tech. I had an early Apple. I had a Mac. I read everything I could get my hands on. But also what really excited me, which was also necessity as well, was the concept of starting things from scratch, because it was really difficult to have a full-time job while you're training for the Olympic Games. In fact, it's impossible because you're training twice a day. It takes about 40 hours a week between training sessions and preparation and treatment to actually be training at that level. And so squeezing in the work in between when it could fit with the training became a necessity. So in order to eat while I was an undergrad in college, I started my first company in Albuquerque. It was a marketing company. I went, door to door selling ad space while I was still a full-time student, full-time athlete, and got kicked in the teeth enough times to become resilient. I then started a company exporting software when that was a thing while I was doing my MBA, while training with the best American, Dean Starkey, in San Luis Obispo. And I would buy inexpensive software in jewel cases, send them to my best buddy in Adelaide, Adam, who worked at a computer store, and he would sell them retail, and we would round trip that and just keep doing that. So that was a good way to make money. So I just did a lot of interesting projects that I needed to do in order to pay the rent while I was training and going to school. And that turned into tech. So after my athletic career, I wrote a business plan to start a new tech company. That didn't go so well, but I ended up pivoting that into my first enterprise software company. And it just went from there. I've since raised over $120 million across 7 companies that I've founded or co-founded. This is my 5th venture capital-backed company with Ryght, and 3rd AI company in a row. And the first one started in 2009 when it wasn't called AI, it was called predictive analytics. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell.
So you mentioned got kicked in the teeth enough. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think it's an incredible skill set to have in life, to be experienced in cold calling, meaning that you're out there pitching a concept to people who couldn't care less if you were there or not, and probably would prefer that you're not. And then giving them the opportunity to see a vision and then buy into that vision. And if you can turn someone around, if you can enroll them in possibility, then you can do just about anything. And so like literally door-to-door sales is I think the kingpin of all life lessons, because you're going there, you're selling your project, you're literally knocking on doors. The prospect is busy scooping their ice cream or doing their job or living their life. And then you come along. And if you can have and build the skill sets to build a personal relationship with someone, understand really what makes them tick, and then provide them with something that makes their life better, and they get to see that, and then they pay you money, that's an incredible skill set. I parlayed that from door-to-door selling of advertising space as an undergrad Australian on Central Avenue in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is not the nicest part of any town in America, and parlayed that into writing business plans and talking to venture capital firms about enrolling them in the possibility of backing a software company in AI for clinical trials. And that's what I do to this day. And we've raised many tens, hundreds of millions of dollars doing exactly that. And it all came from selling ad space door to door in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1988.
Okay. So I've always known you as a great conversationalist and come to know you as a, highly successful serial entrepreneur. And what always struck me about you was yes, what you've just said about the sales aspect, which is not easy.
Yeah.
I think all of us have more of a, let's just say, a potential for it than we realize. It's just, are you willing to kind of put yourself out there, or are you desperate enough to put yourself out there, as you were, literally working for your next meal, right? And I think you kind of get over your ego that way, and that puts you into a really creative space, ironically, right? Which is neat. But so the thing is, though, you're not just a smooth talker, and I'm sure as we'll kind of start to get into some of the really interesting, I guess, possibilities that you have on the horizon, specifically with your current venture at Ryght AI. But, it always struck me how deep you could go into, the technology that you were selling, right? So, oftentimes there could be, a disconnect between, say, sales and marketing teams and product development and technology teams. So, how did you come to, well, I think you already did kind of describe, it's like, well, I was already reading Business Weekly and I was into the tech. And so is that kind of part of your sales heuristic, if you even have one? Like, are you very much deep in the product, throughout? Are you still, diving into primary literature? Like, how do you maintain your kind of tech savviness?
Well, so firstly, if you're passionate about something, you want to know everything about it. So you read a lot. I'm not a computer programmer, but I can't be bullshitted by an engineer anymore, like I could in the old days. Maybe it's possible, but I'm technical enough to know what architectures are appropriate for the business I'm in. I know a lot about sales and marketing. I know a lot about product. I know about user experience, user interface. And obviously the industry, and going deep into senior relationships with very large companies who you rely on to be partners and customers. And so it runs the gamut. But, I don't think sales has anything to do with smooth talking. That seems like slimy used car salesman. I think a lot of people believe that sales is exactly that. It's selling used cars on a lot somewhere and being schmoozy, but it's not at all. Every single person in my company is in sales, whether they believe it or not, because they are out there relying on other people to help them be successful, enrolling them in the possibility of working with them so that they can do their job better, whether that's in engineering, whether it's at a senior level in product design, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in administration or operations, finance. And so everyone listening to this podcast is in sales, whether they know it or not. And so what happens invariably if you want to be successful is that you need to get ahead, and you can't get ahead alone. It takes a village. And so you're always talking to people about what you do. You're getting, hopefully you're inquisitive, intellectually curious enough to want to know about the other person, and then build a rapport and a relationship. And if that person is in business and working with them can help you be successful and the company be successful as a result, and you in turn are helping them, then that's a symbiotic relationship. And what you've done is you've just done a sales job on someone, but you really haven't. You've given them an opportunity to be better off than had they not known you in the first place. And that's all sales is. Whenever I'm starting a company, I'm selling my co-founders on why they should dedicate the next 5 or 10 years of their life to doing something with me. When I'm talking to investors, it's about how they can look really good to their limited partners, their investors, as a VC, if they invest in us and it does well, because in the previous company, our investors did very well. And so there's some commonality by backing this team. And then when you're obviously with a product out talking to customers, you have to save them time. You have to give them more revenue potential, whatever it happens to be. And everyone's in sales. And that's how we get ahead in life. We communicate, we put it out to the universe. And because people are good at heart, usually, they want to help you. And we want to help them. And so that's how you get ahead, I think.
Amazing. I want to pivot into, questions about maybe more like the operational I think the operational heuristic, if you will. And I guess where I'm going with this is like the more established you get, the more people that you bring to the table, the greater the impact of your the consequences, the greater the consequences of things that happen later on. So that means both positive and negative. So I'll take it back using the pole vault analogy. It's like, how many attempts did it take you to break the first Australian record?
Yeah, many. I used to compete a lot, and I have one actual metric here, in that the first time I ever attempted 18 feet, which was 5 meters 50, was at the Mount Sac Relays in 1990, I think. Maybe it was 89. Then I attempted it in no less than 21 competitions and missed it. Then also. And then 1 year later, on my 22nd time attempting 18 feet in a competition, I cleared it at the Mount Sac Relays exactly 1 year later to the day. And so you just keep hammering the same thing over and over again. And when it's a mental barrier like that, which is probably why it took so long, to be honest, because I gave it more power than it deserved, it became very normal. And after that, in the lead up to the 92 Olympics, and 18 feet was the Olympic A standard for qualifying for the Olympics. They have an A and a B standard, but Australia would never send anyone that didn't the A standard. And so I did that. And then it became the most natural height for me ever. In fact, I was coming in at that height many times, such that by the time I won the Olympic trials with an A qualifier and a national record in 92, in the qualifying period in the lead up to those Olympic trials, which is about a 15-month qualifying period, so you get the end of one season and most of the next, I cleared it 50 times in that 18-month period because I used to compete a ton. I won it with an 18 feet Olympic A standard and a national record. And then the Olympic selectors said, you can go to the Olympics, but you just have to do it 2 more times. And I'd already done it 50 times, which is more than any man or woman in any track and field event. And they still made me go to Europe, keep my peak, and then do it another 2 times. So I had 52 qualifiers before I showed up in Barcelona.
Wow.
Crazy.
Okay. So taking that same analogy to your startup life, your entrepreneurial life, were there any physical or mental barriers to the heights that you progressed through? Because you said you're now on your 7th startup that you co-founded. Yeah. So, obviously I think the one of late was breaking new heights. And, were there things along the way that were, real or artificial blocks for you that you had to get to the other side of? And if so, how?
Yeah, I think it's probably a mix of the 2 topics we've discussed. One was, starting a company is great. Anyone can start a company, but can you really take it to the exit, which is an IPO or someone buying it because it has real value? And in the early days, I think it was just a lot of poking around in the dark, loving the process of starting a company, trying to figure out funding and building product and product market fit and selling and revenue, and then obviously selling a company. And, a number of them failed miserably, to be honest. But each time, and I'm not the sort who will put together a resume and then try and get a job if things don't work out, because I just like doing this, and I've always done this, and I know that I can find a way to make a living by, enrolling investors into backing a team and getting paid to do that along the way. It's a nice model where the investors do well if it works out. And I get to, pay my mortgage if I can get this thing up and running and off the ground, and then off to the next level. But each time I got a little less stupid and I got a little better connected, such that when I did prediction software, we raised $46 million. We figured a number of things out. We sold the company, but it was fairly mediocre. It wasn't a great success. But the pieces were there. It was venture capital backed. We had a good team. We had good product, but we couldn't quite figure out product market fit. And I got, again, kicked in the teeth on that topic, such that in the next company, Deep Lens, which I did with 2 co-founders who were based in Ohio, one of which was my customer from prediction. It was a true AI company that figured out how to get the software used and get it deployed broadly. And so we took the tech and we deployed it out had contracts with 250 different community oncology sites. These are clinics around the country that, treat patients and can perform clinical trials. And we started to find revenue repeatability and product market fit with that company, such that someone came along and offered us a ton of money for it. And we sold it in an all-cash deal at an extremely high multiple. And so that was a great success financially, but it also, not coincidentally, was one that was very much a passion project for everyone involved. Like, we lived and breathed getting these patients access to a therapy that they never would have had access to had it not been for us. And these are small sites where they are just getting chemo, basically. They're in Oklahoma or Alabama or rural California somewhere, not Mayo Clinic and City of Hope and MD Anderson. And that's the point. There's massive disparity. And so we went after that because it was such a passion project. We had a good financial outcome. And in, along the lines of being a little less stupid each time, now on company number 7, venture-backed company number 5, with this company, because we had a success where there was a big multiple on the investment for prior investors, it just became easier to raise money. We've got generative AI now, which is a huge thing, and we're native to it because we're so recent. And, we think this could be a much bigger outcome, both for patient outcomes, for the sponsors, which are the pharmaceutical industry, to get their drugs to market much more quickly. And then, of course, financially for the investors along the way. So I think you keep chipping away, you learn, you listen, you enroll, and you keep executing. And that's what we've done. And so it's worked out well. And this current company is by far the biggest opportunity I've ever had in my career. And I've already done pretty well.
Right. And so that's right. Right. And so, yeah. I mean, how much of this is timing? So we've kind of thematically moved here towards now revolutionizing clinical trials and doing so with AI. And, certain things are the same. I think, our conversation on this topic, at least by text, is, starting with the problem, right? So like, what is the problem? And then therefore, how does this become a revolution, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a good question. So firstly, having done this at the last company, Deep Lens, which obviously after we exited, I worked with the buyer, which is a great company called Paradigm, and very friendly with their CEO, Ken. Really cool company, and Kent's a great guy. Kent was a customer of mine at Deep Lens, and then got the opportunity to co-found and be CEO of Paradigm, the buyer. And through the evolution of Deep Lens and even working with the Paradigm team, I got to see many, many problems in the industry and inefficiencies and things that were broken. And when I left Paradigm, was willing to just take some time off and, play with horses and pretend to be retired for 10 minutes until I got bored. And it lasted about 8 minutes because ChatGPT exploded onto the scene. Started to play with that and think, oh, this is quite different. What if we built a native generative AI company? And I was like, I'm just not sure if I want to go through that again. And then I got a call on the very same day from 2 guys who I'd worked with previously. One of which was my CTO at Prediction, John, and Alex, who's a very well-known entrepreneur and executive and kind of industry thought leader in the genomics space, Alex Dickinson. And we decided to start a company because this is a brand new approach to age-old problems that were previously unaddressable with the old AI or old technology period. And so we built an enterprise secure platform for generative AI that's not just plugging into an API from ChatGPT. It's a secure SOC 2 compliant platform that sits above any language model on the back end, such that they can become plug and play because they're going obsolete every 10 minutes. So more importantly, to create applications that can do things to these old problems of massive amounts of unstructured data and faxes and PDFs flying all over the place that you just couldn't solve in a scalable way with the old technology, but now you could. And so we've, long story short, built that platform, and we've built key applications with the model of deploying these free of charge to these research sites around the world, partnering with research networks, and basically getting the tech into as many of these clinics and hospitals as possible, so that the vision now becomes that if every provider who is treating every patient has access to the same AI, and on the other side of that flywheel, if every sponsor, meaning a biotech or a pharma company or the CRO that runs the clinical trial for them, has access to the same tech. You don't need to send faxes to each other or emails with PDF attachments saying, answer these questions. You already know the answers. And so if you already know the answers and you have a real-time connection between those sites and the sponsors and CROs, you've got a real-time exchange of value and the ability to greatly accelerate the time that it takes to get a drug to market. And I'll give you an example. To take a drug to market, the average is $800 million. It's usually in the billions for blockbuster drugs. The average is 12 years. It can take 15 years from the time that you come up with the molecule and find the target to then filing what's called an IND, where you're registering it as a clinical trial, to go through phase 1, 2, 3, et cetera, of the clinical trial, to then publish or register the data and then get it approved by the FDA. That's 15 years. If you could take that down to 10 years on average from 12, then you've brought a drug to market that could save millions and millions of lives just by removing these ridiculous dependencies on fax machines and post-it notes and emailed attachments that are prevalent in the industry. And working on removing some of these upside down incentives where the CROs get paid to do work, not to provide outcomes. So there's just a massive opportunity to deploy this tech at scale. If everyone could jump on the bandwagon and believe in a real-time fiber optic network of sorts, such that that exchange of data and value could become much more efficient and automated with these smart agent workflows that the AI is capable of, and great for, by the way, mining massive amounts of unstructured data that's sitting in faxes and free-form, Word documents, and then using that to get these drugs to market, you'll save millions and millions of lives and billions of dollars. And imagine a blockbuster drug that's just $1.2 billion in revenue, just for round numbers. That's $100 million a month. So if you take a drug to market 2 years earlier, as a result of this, it's at that level, you've generated an extra $2.4 billion in revenue for the sponsor. So why wouldn't they invest heavily in the technology that can accelerate them in this way?
Something else comes to mind as you say this, because you're enabling these different hospitals or centers of excellence, effectively with the tool to, organize their insights faster, right? And to discern, the wisdom that might have taken decades or even longer. But you're also doing it in a way that maintains, I think, kind of a decentralized organization of the data. Is that right? So each center of excellence kind of becomes its own, intelligence, if you will, and then you're by choice kind of plugging into an ecosystem. Is that right? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, it's kind of like a federation of sorts, in that every hospital or clinic, especially the big hospitals, and we just signed USC, University of Southern California. We've signed other major academic medical centers that are being announced over time. And we just announced a major partnership with a customer that represents 750 of these large and small sites in 17 countries. We're deploying our technology to them such that in a future state, if our tech is running at thousands of these sites, there's great value in the aggregation of that footprint, such that the very best sites can be chosen by the sponsors, the drug companies, in order to make sure that they enroll enough patients and can move efficiently. The big problem is not finding the right patients in the right sites. And so by tackling a predictive model, if you will, to predict which site is going to be successful for you, means that you need the data from the site, but you cannot share the data from the site. We don't even ask for the PHI in the initial application, because we can ingest so much information that is non-patient data oriented. It's data about the site based on reports that they previously filled out and made public. that we can build a data profile for each site and then predict which site is going to be successful for the sponsor and their particular clinical trial. But you only get to do that if you have the AI that truly understands the protocol, which is the recipe for the clinical trial, which, by the way, is a 100-page unstructured Microsoft Word document, which has like 20 different variables in it and is impossible for any old school tech to understand at scale. But the smart agents, the intelligent layer that we're building truly understands that protocol. Then all of these magic tricks, these applications can happen as a result without us ever having to share data from the sites, if that makes sense, just data about the sites. And that prediction becomes what makes them a valuable potential site for a particular.
Wow. Well, and so like I hearken back to like the days of, well, like the DNA industry in particular, when 23andMe entered, and there was this whole move, and still is, to integrate genomics with the EMRs and family histories and et cetera, and but you would get CROs quoting, or you get even 23andMe quoting like, well, hey, this patient data is worth $1,500, almost like per set of analysis. So that data is being resold, to the drug companies at a premium, right? But so you've got cost savings happening at a number of instances. One, just the time and the administrative burden that I don't even know how to put a number to that. Well, I'm sure you could. So there's that, and then, well, because it's so much. Well, because each institution probably has it consolidated already. Maybe I don't know. I don't want to say you're getting rid of the middleman, i.e. the CROs. Maybe their role is changing such that the cost per subject is orders of magnitude less. Essentially, what you just described is addressing like many points of value leakage by alleviating, well, I mean, probably like 99% of the administrative burden, minimizing human error. Obviously, that's dependent on the efficacy of your models. But then, and so as a result, you are organizing faster and cheaper. So if I, kind of fast forward to the success of Ryght, say 3 years from now, we could go back to that number that you cited, which I think was around 8 billion in 10 years. And I mean, is it insane to propose that, hey, maybe it's millions and, maybe 2 or 3 years, assuming, let's just say regulatory agencies are keeping pace with your.
Well, I think the regulatory agencies will keep pace if the participants can move more quickly, but on established, protocols or processes that they've outlined. And that's what we're doing. And so currently a CRO will identify, or a sponsor, if they're doing this themselves, they will literally send out emails with attachments, or God forbid faxes, which still happens as well, to 500 sites and saying, hey, fill in this 40 question questionnaire and let us know everything about your site, name, address, names of PIs, names of head of operations, whether you have the following freezers and overnight stay capabilities and other capabilities, and then how many patients do you have with lung cancer? And they send that back. And the sites hate to do this because they do it over and over again. They're filling in the same information over and over again. But unfortunately, it's their lifeblood because they get paid to perform clinical trials. That's their business. Some sites only do clinical research. And then the sponsor or the CRO will get those back. They're sitting there as PDFs or faxes in a pile or in a file system somewhere. They're not able to extract that and use any of that data for analytics. And then they will pick a site based on how many patients they have. Now, what I learned at Deep Lens was that by the time you identify a site, because they have 10 lung cancer patients with the KRAS mutation, by the time the sponsor or the CRO gets around to activating that site, so they're up and running to recruit the patients have died or moved on to somewhere else. So that it's not the same number of patients there anymore. The industry doesn't even use any modeling to predict whether a site can be successful based on whether the principal investigator is a rock star in lung cancer clinical trials. Or what if they're great and they see tons of patients, but they have 7 competing lung cancer trials? That's never taken into account because it's a silo that no one looks at. So we're pulling all of this together with generative AI, building a data footprint based on the data we gather from the sites, but also through publicly available information via APIs that can be interrogated automatically with smart agents in the AI. And then we can predict which site is most likely to be successful for a particular trial and provide a sponsor with, here are 30 sites that are perfect and predicted to be very successful for this study because of the following 6 variables that are indicators or input variables in that model. And then once they activate, we can help speed the activation so it doesn't have to take 4 or 6 months to activate a site for a trial. You do it much more effectively if you can automate these workflows. And then once the site is activated and they're enrolling patients, identifying patients is what other companies like DeepLens and their Biad paradigm do really well. We can do that, but we don't need to because there are many solutions for that. We can then optimize the workflows to take that entire process down by weeks or months or years out of a kind of 2-year process for the sites. And so whether it's us or someone else, someone's going to nail this, they'll do it at scale, and it'll be a $1 billion outcome for whoever does it right because the need is there. This is an $81 billion industry, Jeremy, where that is run by Post-it notes. It's crazy.
Wow. Wow. You know, I love everything that you said in terms of like, let's say the abstract or the concept of what you described. But, you know, something that, you know, struck me just on one of your comments you shared earlier is that it's also, you know, the perception or, you know, your actual, you know, personal experience, seeing the benefit on the other side. So specifically, I'm talking about like the work that you did previously with DeepLens, where you actually saw a patient connected that wouldn't have been connected otherwise. Yeah. And so, yeah. And so, you know, a lot of we get tempted as entrepreneurs to talk about, you know, the 10x exit, et cetera. But what I love about where you're going, it's like, okay, yeah, sure, fine. There'll be a 10x, 100x exit, whatever it is. But that's going to be correlated with number of lives saved, right?
Yep.
And probably accessibility of pharmaceuticals. Like, you know, for example, I can't remember off the top of my head, but the initial, the cost for initial subjects, part of the CRISPR therapy for sickle cell, I think it's like $1 million for the treatment or something to that extent. Don't quote me on that, but not something that your average person can afford. And you know, and then there's obviously like the economy of scale, right? Because what you just described, to kind of start that machine for drugs that are going to be relevant to hundreds of millions or billions, well, that, you know, there's a good argument, there's a good case because the economics are there. There's actually going to be, you know, consumers of these drugs. But then I think about the rare disease communities.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of work in that space in the last year, and you know, my perception of that community is completely changed. I mean, there are, you know, kind of obscure diseases like, you know, severe skin disorders like epidermolysis bullosa simplex, and maybe there's thousands of people like that in the U.S. You know, and this afflicts children with these, you know, crazy burns if you know they just kind of get basically chafe of their clothing or their tennis shoes, you know, and, you know, all kinds of others, you know, with respect to autoimmunity, porphyria. Porphyria is actually getting, you know, some really great attention recently, but, you know, EDS is one that's also getting more attention. But these groups are generally founded by advocates who are, you know, either themselves affected or the parents of, et cetera. And it's a huge burden to raise the money and, you know, get the, you know, collaborations from, you know, say various CROs. It's hard to make the case when, you know, the economy of scale isn't there. But like what you're talking about is a way to actually, you know, show economies of scale for even, smaller populations, which I wish wasn't a motivating factor, but the fact is it is. But like something like, rare disease, when you start to consider the fact that, let's say 1 in 10 individuals is afflicted with a rare disease, I think that's an underestimate because a lot of these go undiagnosed, and much more are carriers. So if you start to extrapolate that out to the entire population, let's say you've got, between 1 and 2 billion of people affected with these disparate, rare/orphan diseases. But the thing is, if you can systematize the drug discovery process, and again, this is in particular to perhaps one of the most costly aspects of it, data collection, organization, and I'm sure there's a huge analysis component of yours, probably a reanalysis component. It's probably crossover and reuse it. You can reuse subject data, so things just get much cheaper and faster. And so maybe those underserved communities might start to see, some more attention and some more intervention.
Yeah, it's kind of rising tide floats all boats. And I think being able to, by the way, there are some other drivers here too, and that there are mandates now to have, DEI within, clinical trials. So you're not just treating rich white people with clinical trials and gathering data from those people in large cities. There need to be underserved populations. There need to be rural populations. There need to be, brown people, black people, white people, Asians, etc., that have to be part of this. And so going into geographies, going into rural areas, and what it takes to be able to communicate with these community sites that are very fragmented because they're just owned by one doctor and they're in the middle of nowhere. That's previously been very difficult. And so you're pulling together all of the above, including the large academics, doing it on a global basis and making this available, not just in oncology, but all indications. And it's a flywheel, and that the more patients, the more sites, more indications you have in the network, the more valuable that becomes to the sponsors, and vice versa. The more drugs or trials that are available in our exchange, which is kind of our dating app for clinical trials, then the more valuable that becomes to the sites as well. And so at scale, if you get the flywheel going at scale, that becomes an incredibly valuable network to be a part of, both for the sponsors and CROs, but also the sites and their patients.
Yeah. Well, and you can get, second and third expert opinions of, teams of scientists. And so like the global collaborate, it's like instantaneous, and the application of multiple models, and endless.
Yeah.
So Simon, I know I only have you for an hour today because you're, fast paced and hard charging at this, critical mission before you. There's, 3 kind of preliminary framing questions I always ask folks, and I know you've been through them. Really, if we're going to sum up our conversation, I would ask you, as I say, these 3 questions: is what's the most important thing that folks need to hear, coming out of this dialogue? So, I say it like this, really is, if this was your last podcast, what would you say? And then who would need to hear it? And once we've got that, then the next question is who would you nominate to be on the DNA of things?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. I think that this new generative AI stuff is completely groundbreaking / earth-shattering. We all have played with ChatGPT. We read about this stuff everywhere. We know about robots or self-driving Teslas. What that really shows is that this technology is ready for prime time, and it's doing things with data based on these incredibly high computationally trained models called large language models, of course. And they're capable of doing things that literally were previously just completely impossible. And when applied into a very important vertical industry like clinical research, especially in oncology, should a company like ours and others figure this out, which we're well on the way to doing, literally millions and millions of lives can be saved. However, it doesn't happen, and those lives can't be saved if people are tentative and they're sitting back and waiting to see how things shake out because they're not early adopters.
Right.
People have to jump into this and try something. Whether you've got a smart person on your team who can plug into ChatGPT and build a proof of concept, or you want to do something highly strategic and move very quickly with a company that is doing this for a living and that's all they do, you've got to do something, because the more participants in this ecosystem can contribute, the more lives will be saved. And by the way, everyone benefits financially from having done that. So I think that's the number one thing. Do something. Just do it, Nike, but get in there and do something and learn. But don't sit on the sidelines, because this is too important.
And so who that message is for is what, these health institutions, these researchers?
I think so. I think it's the hospitals. I think it's the clinics. When I say hospitals, I mean the clinical trial researchers, even, regular kind of clinical care. There are companies that provide this type of technology for the clinical use cases, making doctors more efficient at treating their patients, transcribing meetings or visits and taking action from those. Like, all of this stuff is going places very fast, in the same way that maybe self-driving technology is and Waymo and in transportation. But this is a sea change in a big way. So those hospitals, those providers, those clinical research entities or groups or clinics, but then most importantly, the biotechs and the pharma companies. There are 20,000 biotechs out there. Jump in and start doing something. CROs, don't worry about disrupting yourself, because you're going to do poorly if you don't embrace this technology, even if there's a short-term pain associated with that, because you're not paid just to do busy work, but you will be chosen because you're better at picking sites, because you're better at enrolling and managing patients on the trial. And there'll be new revenue streams that can come from that. But more importantly, you're going to win deals and beat competitors who are not embracing this because they're sitting on the sidelines.
Amazing. And the last question, Simon, was who would you nominate to be on the DNA of Things?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I know a lot of really super interesting people, both in the industry and kind of adjacent, but I think I would probably have a riot on my hands if I didn't suggest one person, and he's my chief medical officer. He's a very famous podcaster and author, hematologist, oncologist. He was the chief medical officer at Cardinal Health for their specialty unit. He ran the global Global Precision Oncology Alliance of sites, with a big network at Caris Life Sciences, which is a genomics lab for cancer and other rare diseases, etc. Really, really good company, pre-IPO. And now he's my chief medical officer, and his name is Dr. Chadi Naban. And he is so aggressive with getting people to listen to his podcast and buying his book that he refused to work with me until I bought 6 copies of his latest book, which is called The Cancer Journey. So he's an entertaining guy. So I would absolutely recommend Chadi for the next one.
So it's Chadi Naban, is that how I say it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll definitely reach out to you for his contact following this meeting. Simon, it's always a pleasure reconnecting with you. Of course, I lament to end our conversation because I've thought of 100 other things to ask you, but I promise you, I'll certainly be following up, and I'll just finish with saying thank you for everything you're doing for the industry, and also being a living embodiment, the testament of hard work and resilience, and going after the thing that truly excites you to do good on this planet. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeremy. Good to see you again.
All right, we've traced Simon Arkell's journey from the track to the boardroom, from overcoming physical limits to revolutionizing clinical trials. What emerges is not just a story of entrepreneurial grit, but an invitation to rethink how we tackle healthcare's most stubborn barriers. Simon has shown us that the same relentlessness that cleared 18 feet in competition can help clear the administrative and data hurdles that slow life-saving drugs. As listeners, we're left with a challenge. What obstacles in our own fields need that kind of tenacious, creative assault? Simon's path reminds us that transformation is possible, not just through technology, but through the relentless human spirit willing to learn, pivot, and persist. May we all find courage to vault higher in our own pursuits and to see failure not as an end, but as the beginning of the next leap. Indeed.